The chances of being hospitalized with COVID over the course of this study increased if you forced people with a previous case of COVID to get vaccinated. Okay, I'm going to move forward. That's cool. The next thing to say that's worthwhile in this is, remember, we would say that the government shouldn't have the right to imply these sort of restrictions against people's bodily autonomy unless there is a huge reason to do so. Like, for example, would you agree with this? You wouldn't support vaccine mandates if it would save one life. Would you agree with that? Are we having a debate, or what's happening here?
Wait. I don't. Wait. I don't think that whether or not somebody's going to die is the metric is the only metric I'm going to care about.
Okay, that's fair. So would you say, though, that there has to be some sort of threshold? For example, would you force people to take a drug, vaccine or otherwise, if it could prevent 5 bad outcomes? Or would you say, no, clearly with a number that small, we wouldn't enforce against people's bodily autonomy. It'd have to be something of a more magnanimous number.
Correct. There's some arbitrary number that when we see it, we can understand that there's going to be a risk that's posed prior to it becoming a large problem.
And that's fair. That's totally fair. And I'm not going to hold you to, well, what exactly is that number? I get it. We're just making a simple argument that it's not just to protect one life we force people. And I assume that you would agree with that. So the problem I have here is this population of people specifically, those that had a previous infection. If we look at California, I believe the numbers they looked at was 1.3 million. You know how many people ended up getting COVID, even asymptomatic? 6,000 out of 1.3 million. Why should those people be forced to be vaccinated if that number is that small? That's not just deaths, that's any infection.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the argument?
Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
You seem to make an argument that there has to be a certain threshold. It doesn't just imply death. I say you wanted to force people with a previous case of COVID to be vaccinated, right, or tested. When that number is, there were only, out of 1.3 million, 6,000 of them that had any COVID infection, even asymptomatic. That's such a low percentage. Why would we take away their bodily autonomy? It seems to not meet the threshold arguments that you would be suggested are necessary.
I do think that that's this is only the one subsect of people.
Those are the people. Those are the subset. But the argument I'm making is that you supported a mandate.
Why would I want them to get vaccinated? Because they would still.
No.
Okay, so let me put it this way. Why would I want? I'm going to answer your question. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Why would I want people who have previous immunity from a previous infection to get vaccinated?
That's not the question.
If they already have
That's not the question.
Some protection.
That's not the question.
Okay.
The question was, why would you force them?
I was going to say, if I'm not, they can get tested.
Okay, why would you take away their autonomy to force them to get vaccinated or force them to get tested when the number is so low?
I don't think that we ever see requirements for vaccinations before this as stripping away somebody's autonomy. Are we stripping away the autonomy of parents by making them get their kids vaccinated before?
Yes, forcing someone to take a drug would be stripping away of their autonomy. If you say, for example, we force a polio vaccine, I may disagree or agree, but it's definitely coercion. The question is the threshold for why we do that significant enough? Well, we could say, well, if they didn't, then polio would have infected 6,000 of them, or something to that effect. What I'm saying is you had this threshold argument, which you've conceded that, of course, we wouldn't force people to take some sort of drug, particularly a new experimental drug, if there was a very low threshold of how many people were being affected. I'm not a math whiz, but 6,000 out of nearly 1.4 billion people, what's that percentage? Tom, are you good at math? You got a calculator in front of you?
That's not the correct number.
Why wouldn't it be?
You're not good at math.
You're right, I'm not good at math. You tell me what that percentage is. People. I'm sorry?
Based on the numbers you just said 1.4 billion.
Million, with an M. It's the specific number, if you'd like, just so we don't accuse me, the specific number is 1,370,782 people that were unvaccinated but had a previous COVID infection. Of that, 6,805 had a COVID incident, which would include even asymptomatic infections. So what's 6,805? What percentage of that is of 1,370,782
wait a minute.
people? Wait a minute, what? I'm asking.
Wait. That's when you're looking at Yeah, wait a minute. What I'm trying to tell you,
Okay.
that number's in California.
Yes.
And if you look at other states, like they looked at
New York?
when they looked at New York, that number goes up. That's not like a stable number that's going to apply
Sure,
across the board.
let's look at New York. They looked at 500, in that same population, unvaccinated people with the previous COVID infection. They looked at 527,100.
Less than half.
Please, let me finish. Let me finish. They looked at 527,140 people, and of those, 3,250 ended up with COVID. Again, a remarkably small percentage. Remarkably small. And you're right. This study looked at 2 states and came up with almost identical numbers at both. Those with previous cases of COVID were more protected than those that were vaccinated, and their chances of getting COVID, even asymptomatic, was remarkably low. Like, what is that percentage? Less than 1%?
Okay. So I'm curious. What do you think that the government should do about it then? Should they suggest that people get infected then to protect themselves?
No, I didn't
And
say
so
that.
we have people like having COVID parties so they can spread it to people. Well, then the thing that we would try to get people to do would be to get vaccinated to protect them. You can't encourage people to get sick in order so that they be protected. It's kind of a catch-22 there.
That has
The one
nothing
thing
to
that
do.
you
The
can
question.
do to
The
reduce
question.
these numbers is
The question doesn't identify what we're talking about specifically. We're talking about millions upon millions of people that already had a COVID infection. What should happen with those people? You say those people should be forced to be vaccinated or forced to be tested every week. I say that's absurd because those people are more protected than those that are vaccinated. And we haven't even got to the third part of this, was that forcing them to get vaccinated actually harmed them. This is before we even talk about the harm that could come with vaccine. We're just talking right now, should the government have the right to tell people that have less than a percentage point chance of getting infected with something that they should be forced to take some sort of drug? I say no. Would you like to move on to part 3? The outcomes for these people that are forced to take the vaccine on top of having a previous case? Would you like to move on to that?
I would say that if you look at the number, I would say that you see a stark decrease if people who were infected had gotten vaccinated.
Okay,
and
so let's
we don't
talk.
have any
What do you
other
mean by that?
recourse.
So you're saying people that had a previous case of COVID, if they get a vaccine on top of that, that offers them superior protection?
Yeah, based on the study you sent.
Okay, you want to get to the
Yeah,
numbers?
absolutely.
No problem. Totally willing to talk about it. You're technically right. Let's talk about the numbers. If we go back to the same group, the vaccinated with previous COVID are 968,167 people, and they looked at, there were 273 cases that required hospitalization. The unvaccinated with the previous case of COVID, they looked at 1.37 million and change, and there were 378 amount of cases. So group 1 is people that had a previous COVID vaccine, or previous COVID case and got vaccinated. And group 2 is people that didn't get
How about we
vaccinated.
just use percentages to make things a little bit more clear?
Because I don't have the percentages, I didn't do the
when you use
percentages.
raw numbers here, it's going to be very. It says it right next to them.
No, those percentages aren't. Those aren't the specific percentages. Those are different. The indices or whatever they're using are different. Nonetheless, I'll finish this. I think I do the percentages here. I wrote this down years
has
ago because
percentage in
I
percent.
was looking. Let me finish, and then you can see if you think that these percentages are good or not. Yes, you read that right. Over 1.3 million people with a previous case of COVID in California, according to the CDC's own numbers. Only 378 people had to be hospitalized with COVID. And that's the group that we're going to force vaccines. What's even more astonishing, that this means that over the course of this study, those that weren't vaccinated and had a previous case had a 0.0276 chance of being hospitalized with COVID. And if you force those people to get vaccinated, guess what? The
Why are you
number,
switching it to
let me
hospitalized?
finish
You're
real
switching
quick.
it.
Let me finish real quick. You wanted the percentages. I'm happy to give them to you. I'll repeat that sentence again so you could hear. What's even more astonishing is over
but
the
you're
course
changing
of, please let me
metric we're
finish if you
comparing.
want the rest of the
Drazi,
debate.
there's
If you want,
there's a lag on your end, and so even when you do start talking, it is like 3 seconds behind for us, and so vice versa. So try to keep it. Wait for the pauses.
so I'll finish. It's only like 3 more sentences.
Okay.
What's even more astonishing is that this means over the course of this study, those that were unvaccinated and had a previous COVID infection had a 0.0276 chance of being hospitalized with COVID. And if you force them to get vaccinated, they had a 0.0282% chance of being hospitalized. Yes, you read that right. The chances of being hospitalized with COVID over the course of this study increased if you forced people with a previous case of COVID to get vaccinated. How can you justify
Okay,
that?
so you're switching from. Well, I don't have to justify because that's not what we were talking about. We were talking about people getting infected. I care about people getting infected and spreading to other people. We talk about people that are hospitalized, and I don't know why. Why do we care about that?
Well, I think we would care about... Do you care how many people each year get the common cold?
Not in the context of what we're talking about, no. Just like I don't care how many people are hospitalized when we're talking about how many people are going to contract it and then be able to go out and spread it to other people.
The reason that we are concerned about COVID in the first place was because of the people that had terrible outcomes. No one really gives a shit how many people had a asymptomatic case of COVID. Now, we already went through that the chances of spreading COVID if you had a previous infection are remarkably low, less than a percentage point. We already went through how that was better than people that were vaccinated. So forcing these people seems to have almost no benefit whatsoever in preventing even asymptomatic cases of COVID. But what we do see is it makes it more likely for those people to have more severe cases of COVID. So why should you tell how do you explain to someone like, hey man, I think you should have to take this vaccine, even though you have almost no chance of contracting COVID, even though you have almost no chance of spreading it, and even though you're more protected than the vaccinated person, but we should force you to take this knowing that it will increase your chances of having a severe case of COVID. How can you rationalize that?
Okay. So it's not what we were talking about. You switched to this now. When I pointed out that people have better immunity who have gotten it, you've switched to hospitalizations. The entire time we've been talking about people getting infected. And as soon as I bring up a point that would suggest that having COVID and still getting a vaccine would be better, you want to switch to hospitalizations. If you want to talk about hospitalizations, we can talk about hospitalizations, but I'm not going to let you run away from this point to talk about hospitalizations.
We weren't running away from a point. You have literally
argument.
We're not running away from a point. You've literally stalled on every point that I've brought up.
Okay, then
every single one. So, for example, the first point I had was that people that had previous case of COVID were more...
Instead of reiterating your first point, you can just respond to the point that I made that you talked about hospitalizations instead of.
I will respond to your points if you like. Your point that you're making now, you tell me if I'm wrong, I'll steel man your position, is that I, quote, ran away from your point of what we had been talking about previously and now ran away to hospitalizations. Is that your argument?
Yeah, I'm asking you to address the fact that people that got vaccinated, if you had a previous case, are significantly more protected.
And do you think it would be incumbent on me in answering that to discuss why I'm not running away from the point and have already addressed that? Do you think that would be a legitimate way for me to respond?
You could just, if you think you've already responded, then please just repeat your response and then we can move on.
Which is exactly what I was doing, and then you interrupted me and told me that I should have to respond when that was exactly what I was doing. So will you give me the courtesy of giving the response that you claim you want to hear?
By all means.
Okay. The point I made this threshold argument, which you conceded to, that said that we wouldn't say just for a small amount of outcomes that we would force something upon someone. And I made the point, which was uncontested, that these people have such a low chance of having any COVID incident, even asymptomatic, that it seems absurd when there's less than a percentage point of getting it over the course of this study that we would have forced this upon them, particularly when they were more protected than the people that had the vaccine. So now we've moved on to the point of, okay, since there's no offensive reason to make them get this because it's such a small, less than a percentage that it would have some effect on, now we could look at offensive reasons to not get it. In other words, harm that would be caused to them. The first area of harm that I'm isolating is because you've already lost the argument that there's no real reason, no substantial reason to prevent COVID to force these people to get it, because the protection they get is so minuscule and the incidence that they have anyways is so minuscule that it wouldn't be worth it. Why would we force this upon them if it causes severe effects, such as a more severe case of COVID? Can you answer that?